I'm going to be talking, as Camilla said, about the carbon impact of everyday things, which is sort of very much central to how we at Terra Neutra, the company that is about a year old last week, I think we set up the company a year ago, think about carbon emissions and the impact that carbon emissions have on global warming and on climate change. So I'm going to talk again a little bit about what we do, how we do it, why we do it that way, what our goals for the future are, and how we think that can help with this challenge that we face. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what I see happening at a slightly bigger picture, if you like, in terms of what governments and, well, particularly this government and the corporate sector are doing in this space. And then end with a kind of rousing bit of optimism / idealism / naivety about why I think we can all make a difference to this challenge that we face, and why ultimately I am optimistic and positive that we will overcome it, and that we will kind of get through the climate issue that we face. I used to work in video streaming. In fact, I worked in video streaming technology for about 12 years. I worked for an American company, and that was great fun. And previous to that, I worked for the broadcaster Channel 4, and I love television and I love watching it. And so working for a broadcaster and then working for a company that was helping deliver video over the internet for things like the iPlayer and Netflix and all of the things, YouTube and all of the things that we slightly take for granted now, but did not 15 years ago, was great fun. What you see here is my British Airways, what they call my flight path. And this is, as is obvious, that's my air travel. That is my historical air travel over 10 years with British Airways. And that was, I would say, 80 to 90% of my air travel. 313,000 miles flown, 626 hours in the air. That sounds pretty terrifying. 22.3% of the moon's Earth orbit, which is, I'm still trying to calculate that in my head. So this was one of the reasons that I got into the world of sustainability, why I wanted to set up Terra Neutra, and why I felt like I needed to do something in this space. We all are aware of, I think, the pollution that's caused by air travel, and particularly in terms of emissions, and the fact that obviously because planes are flying higher up, those emissions are close to the atmosphere, so cumulatively it has a greater effect than other sorts of emissions. And whereas before I loved looking at this because it was great. I went to 34 cities and 24 countries, and that was lovely. Now I look at that and go, wow, okay, I've got some making up to do. And so this was a big driver for me to set up Terra Neutra, and why I wanted to get into this space and try and do something that would ultimately make a difference to this problem. So that's kind of, this is my personal carbon emissions cross to bear, I suppose, and I am slowly but surely whittling away at it. One of the things that I'll come on to talk about is obviously we're looking very much at how we can, at Terra Neutra, we're looking very much at how we can help people manage their carbon footprint, their personal carbon footprint, and companies, and etc. But that footprint is, it's our current and future footprint, but it's also our past footprint, our residual footprint, if you were. And this is the bulk of my residual footprint. And so that's something that I'm going to be tackling over time. Let me move over and talk now a little bit about what we do. I should have started at the beginning at Terra Neutra. So we founded the company a year ago. This is myself, a friend of mine called John, who lives just around the corner with me here in East London, and an old colleague of mine from Channel 4, Charlotte, who I bumped into quite by chance, and she was doing a lot, actually. She's a mother of 3 children, so she's got a lot on her plate, but wanted to wanted to sort of get back into a business, and has been very passionate about living a more environmentally friendly life. Waste is interesting. That was what got her started, was plastic waste in her household. John is an environmental engineer, so he helps companies and businesses with their sustainability strategy. And I was the guy that recycled stuff and put on jumpers when it was cold, but I didn't have really their same background. We came together with an idea that individuals, that people, if given the opportunity and the tools to do something about carbon emissions, would do that. Our view was that there was an increasing awareness of carbon emissions as a driver of climate change, and a belief that carbon emissions exist, that climate change exists. And with people like Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough making very public and very passionate statements about the environment, and about particularly emissions and their impact on the environment, that it was a great opportunity to try and kind of rally people around that, and make changes, help them make changes to their everyday lives that would drive a positive impact to the problem that we face of climate change. That was our vision. We kind of came together and we launched this company in 2019. Our vision is to create innovative products and services that help people live more sustainably. That's quite a broad topic. There is so much that goes into being, more sustainable, living a more sustainable life. We are very, very focused on carbon emissions. That is our, that is our core focus. And so, whilst everything from plastic pollution to food waste, these all have overlap, as I'll go on to speak. We are very much focused on that concept of the carbon footprint, and particularly on the carbon footprint of individuals or groups of individuals. We talk about this concept of managing a carbon footprint through three triggers or mechanisms, if you will, which are awareness of that footprint. So you need to be aware of something in order to do anything about it, or to want to change anything about it. Reduction, so helping people figure out how to make their carbon footprint smaller. And then offsetting of the residual emissions. And the residual emissions would be what you can't reduce over time, and also my air travel, for instance. So my historical emissions, if you will. Of all of those at the moment, I believe the most important is awareness, because at this point, I think it's still the case that there are many, many people out there who, it's not that they don't believe in climate change. It's not that they don't believe in carbon emissions. It's just that they don't really understand the link between their everyday lives and these problems. And I think that I would have, a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I think I would have fallen into that category. I looked at it as a problem for governments, as a problem for countries, international organizations like the UN, industry, absolutely. But what am I going to do about it? And I think that is, I think I've obviously moved on a bit since then, but I think there is still probably well, definitely, if you read, some of the surveys about, people's knowledge of net zero and people's understanding of climate change, there's still a huge number of people out there who don't necessarily understand the link between their behavior and carbon emissions and climate change. And so it's really these people that we want to reach out to and talk to and kind of get to know and hopefully persuade to change. And so again, it is that awareness piece that we are really try very hard, and probably is the most difficult as well. Once somebody knows about this, they're usually quite amenable to the reduction and offsetting bit, but it's getting them to know about it that is the tricky bit. we have a mission statement, which I'll talk about a little bit, which is to create a carbon positive world. This is when we get into jargon, I'm afraid. And I apologize for that, because one of our company values is simplicity. So when I entered, came into this space, I looked around, and as a deeply unscientific and non-mathematical person, what I saw was lots of, very technocratic vocabulary, terms that I didn't understand, numbers, letters capitalized, small letters, numbers, and I looked at that and thought, oh, chemistry or physics, and it makes my head hurt. And so I thought, well, if I feel like that and I'm actually engaged and want to understand this topic, what is somebody who is not engaged going to do? They're going to pull back. They're going to find this very hard to get to grips with. So we want to make this problem and the solutions to these problems and the tools to use as simple as possible. However, there is still the need for some jargon. So our mission statement of creating a carbon positive world is a reaction to the goal of net zero or carbon neutrality, which is a great thing, and hugely important, and we should all get there. But as a goal to inspire people, my analogy would be, it's a bit like having an overdraft of £100 and saying that your goal is to get back to naught. Well, of course it is, and that's what you would want to do. And unfortunately, I have a lot of experience of overdrafts, so I'm talking very, very much from experience here. But actually, what you really want to do is get to being £100 in credit. And that's simplistically the difference between carbon neutrality and being carbon positive. So if we can persuade people, so if everybody does just enough to get to neutrality, that's great. But wouldn't it be more inspirational and more exciting to say, actually, let's get beyond that? Let's get into a positive space, as opposed to just a sort of neutral space. And I think even the word neutral space sounds faintly uninspiring. And again, if you thinking about this problem of raising awareness and engaging people with all of the things that fight for their attention at the moment, the language that we use to talk about our mission and what we're trying to do needs to be energizing language. It needs to be language that can enthuse people and get them behind a goal and a set of ideas that they can be excited by, and that they can in turn excite other people by. And so that was the thinking behind Carbon Positive. There are lots of other terms that sort of have a similar meaning to that. The scientific part of it is that you are effectively taking more carbon out of the atmosphere than you are putting in. But I think, carbon positive is, sounds, it makes me feel better. And so that's why we settled on it. And then company values of authenticity, simplicity, and optimism. The authenticity, because that's how we want people to see us, as being truthful, as having integrity, and of standing behind the things that we talk about, and the products and the tools that we serve. Simplicity, I've already touched on. And then optimism, because I think you have to be optimistic about our ability to solve this problem, and indeed all of the world's problems, but particularly this one. I think it's very easy to get very bogged down in in the numbers, and in the numbers of years, and the huge amounts of emissions here, and from China, and coal and oil, and all of these things, and it can all of a sudden feel like a very overwhelming problem and challenge. And so I think that sense of optimism that we can ultimately come together and meet this challenge is really important. And also, it helps. It makes one feel, again, energetic and enthused to kind of to work hard. We work across a number of different sort of business streams, as it were, trying to talk to and address different people with each of them, and trying to achieve slightly different goals with each. And then I'm going to go into each of them in a little bit of detail, because they speak sort of not only to what we're doing, but actually to the direction of travel that I see other people and companies, and indeed the government going, which I think is a good thing, as it suggests that we're all aligned. We're probably all going at slightly different speeds, but I do see a kind of some alignment of direction of travel, which is great. So the first stream is what we call our direct to consumer offering, which is a sort of smart way of saying we've got a website that everybody can go to, and that is where people can offset their personal carbon footprint, or indeed the carbon footprint of their family, and indeed the carbon footprint of their pet. And that, sounds like I'm making a joke. I'm not. This is the carbon impact of everyday things. Everything in our lives has some form of carbon emissions impact, whether it is our pet because of the food that they eat and what they sleep in, whether it is the way that we travel, whether it is the clothes that we wear, the food that we eat, etc. It is difficult to escape quite how carbonized, if you will, our lifestyles are. And so, every aspect of those lifestyles, can be examined and can be measured, and ultimately, therefore, can be kind of reduced or offset. And that's, I think that's a great thing, because that means that even if we change little things in our lives, they will have an impact. Again, I think this is something that the vast majority of people are not that aware of, and so this offering is particularly important in terms of helping people build that awareness. We work with small businesses to help them measure their carbon footprints, which is the operation of their business. It can be the carbon footprint of the offices that they work in, perhaps the vehicles that they have in their fleet, the energy that they use, of course, and then their supply chains for manufacturing and distribution. That's a sort of a smaller part of what we do, but it's a very rewarding part, particularly when businesses come to you and say, we know this is a problem. We know that there's something that we want to do, but we don't know where to start. Can you help us? And we've been doing this for 3 or 4 companies, and it's really, setting a company of, a business of 10 or 20 people on a journey to becoming a more sustainable business is a great thing, because it has a sort of a cumulative effect, because it's not just that business, it's the people within it, and then it's the people who are partners to that business, and the people who are suppliers to that business, and then the customers of that business. So it has a huge halo effect in terms of the people that it reaches. We are looking into building technology that can be, can provide what we call automated carbon footprinting of a product. So, when you buy, I'm now blanking on something you might buy, an article of clothing, a light bulb, food in a supermarket. Again, each of those products, each of those items has a carbon footprint. And so the ability to measure that carbon footprint and then make the consumer, make you aware of the carbon footprint of what you're buying through whether that's labeling, something as simple as, a traffic light system. Again, if you think of that being something that you would see in every supermarket that you went to, or whenever you went onto the internet and bought something on Amazon or some other large e-commerce platform, these businesses, these platforms, these shops see hundreds of thousands and millions of people, coming across their thresholds or across their websites. And so, as a way again of raising awareness, that there is huge potential there. It's interesting to see that Unilever, an enormous company, has come out and said that it is adding carbon labeling to all of their products. It's going to be quite a long process, but that's something that they've committed to doing this year. The carbon pricing that Camilla was talking about, that's something that you could absolutely see popping up in this sort of a space whereby you are buying. You're either buying an item of whatever it happens to be, and the carbon cost, as it were, of that item is flagged to you at the point of purchase, or the business that is making that it has to pay either a tax or some form of credit because of where their products sit within that kind of spectrum. So if you are a carbon intensive company, if you will, if your products are manufactured in very carbon intensive ways, if they have high emissions, then you could end up being taxed more, and that pricing would be quite penurious for you. But obviously at the lower end, the sort of less intensive, which would be better than the lower the pricing. So working on embedding that kind of technology into companies where there is the ability again to reach many, many more people than honestly would ever come to our little website. We're competing for attention with, all of the people that I just mentioned, like Amazon, but Facebook as well, and Netflix, and everywhere that you could go, if you wanted to be on the internet. So going, rather than trying to get people to come to us, going to where they are, is a route that we're taking. And then finally, we do research and development with companies where we take a very, very deep dive into what's called the life cycle impact of their products. So this is from the design of their product all the way through to the manufacturing, to the distribution, to the point at which it hits, a shop or someone, or is delivered to someone's doorstep. And again, that's a very, very complex space. There's many, many different components, particularly within, a manufacturing process. And so the idea there is to analyze each one of those and say, let's measure the emissions of every single component of this product life cycle and find out where we can reduce. So if we switch that supplier for that supplier who uses renewable energy and that one doesn't, what can we do there? If we use a different type of material that has a lower carbon impact, what can we do? And the results, as I'll show you, can be quite spectacular. We've been focusing a lot on the fashion and clothing industry, and there's the reason for that is it is the second most emissions polluting industry after farming. It's arguably there's agriculture, air travel, and fashion. Agriculture generally has the highest, but then from an emissions perspective, but for carbon emissions, the fashion industry is I think is second. We don't count the energy industry because I think it's sort of pretty obvious, whereas not that many people understand or aware of quite what a big negative impact the fashion industry has on emissions. And a lot of that is to do with the concepts of fast fashion. So they need to be constantly making new stuff, and then those the production processes for the articles of clothing that you're making are incredibly emissions intensive, or they use loads of energy, they use lots of water. There have been some great documentaries on this, and then they are hitting shops and they're out of date within 2 or 3 months, and they all get taken away and dumped, or they're worn for a season and they're not worn again. And so the waste, the production, the overhead in terms of emissions on the production side of things is huge, and then the waste is absolutely huge. The good news is this is something that people are becoming increasingly aware of, and what we can see is that services, whether they're websites or indeed physical shops, where people are looking at clothes in a different way, and by that I mean not buying new clothes, they are looking to resell. So they're buying more secondhand clothes. They are hiring clothes instead of buying them. There is a real sea change in the way that people are looking at clothing, and all of that we think is based on based on a greater awareness of the impact of fashion. I think it's really clothes are something that we all wear, we all need. This is definitely, I think, an area where people are significantly more you're starting to be significantly more aware of the impact that they have. And so this is one of the reasons why we've started looking particularly at fashion. I wanted to talk a little bit about the again the sort of the three pillars for managing one's carbon footprint. We've talked a little bit about the importance of awareness. Where you have an ability to get in front of groups of people, or reach more than one-to-one, go one-to-many. These are sort of fantastic opportunities. And so whether it's sort of talks like this, whether it's sort of newsletters or blogs, or going and speaking to schools as I have done, these are all things that we really try to do a lot of. It has that cumulative effect. And it also, it also helps people to understand that there is a sort of, there isn't an expectation that everybody is going to change their lives, overnight. I am, as a sort of observer of human behavior, know how difficult it is to get people to make small changes. But again, if we can really drive on the awareness side of things, then that is what will make those small changes happen. And at that point, you get into the reduction and you get into offsetting. Reducing your carbon footprint, the average UK resident's carbon footprint is 10 tons a year. It's 10 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. A ton of carbon dioxide is a very strange concept. I always think of a metal shipping container with nothing in it, which again is weird, but I'm still not sure what a great metaphor for that is. But my personal carbon footprint was 13 tons when I started Terra Neutra a year ago. It's now 8.5, which I'm very happy with. I still eat meat. I haven't actually bought any new clothes for a year. That was a commitment I made to Terra Neutra, but being honest, I don't really mind that much. I have taken 2 flights this year. I will hold my hand up and admit to that happily. Well, not happily, but I have. What I have done is I've switched to using a renewable energy supplier. I haven't bought any new clothes. We've been much more careful in the house about energy consumption. We've been more careful about cutting down on waste. And actually, a lot of the key sort of points about reducing your carbon footprint just come back down to being careful, to being conservative, to not being wasteful, to not buying more than you need, not using more than you need, which are not. I feel like they shouldn't be difficult lessons, but they are they are ones that I think are relatively simple to adopt. I think people would be surprised if they realized how much they could reduce their carbon footprint. And they are surprised by how much they can reduce their carbon footprint by just taking a few simple steps, like switching to a renewable energy supplier, like maybe eating meat, once or twice less a week if they do, like, taking the train a few more times instead of driving their car. Offsetting is an interesting space. I think it has historically a bad reputation. I think it was the origin of the term greenwashing, which many of you will be very familiar with, which is where you are purporting to be an environmentally concerned citizen or company, but actually what you're just doing is putting a load of labeling, a load of PR out there, and then kind of carrying on doing exactly what you were doing before. George Monbiot, a very intelligent commentator, described offsetting. I think he said it was a bit like the Catholic Church handing out indulgences, and I don't think he meant that in a good way. I think we're very aware of all of the history of offsetting and of the negative connotations that are attached to it. What I would say about offsetting, however, is that it has an absolutely critical part to play in this overall management of a carbon footprint. And I believe we all need to accept that, because we can all reduce as much as possible, but we will never get our carbon footprints down to zero. I would love to be proved wrong about that, but I don't think I will be, even by 2030 or 2050. There will still be some residual carbonization of our lives that we will not be able to get rid of. But we will be able to offset it. So the reason offsetting is number 3 is because it's the last thing that we say we should be doing. The other thing that I've already spoken about, of course, is this concept of your residual carbon footprint, my air travel, for instance. But you could look at lots of things. You could look at your energy consumption, your consumption of consumer electronics, of clothing, of all sorts of things. They could all be, they are all part of your residual footprint that you could look to offset over time. So I think offsetting absolutely has a part to play within this process, this journey. We think it's a critical part, and so we defend offsetting, if you like, but within that context. Somebody asked me the other day what would happen if somebody just came to our site and bought an offset and thought that everything was okay and they didn't have to do anything else. And my response as well, I sort of doubt that would be the case, because if you're actually coming to look for our website, then you must have it in your mind that you want to do something, you want to make a change. And I think, again, that might be a slightly idealistic view, but again, even if somebody is just making a small change, they're starting. I want to show you just quickly what this sort of the technology that we've been talking about might look like. So this is really helping businesses make environmentally conscious decisions and help their customers make environmentally conscious decisions as well. So in this sort of mock-up of what one of these online experiences might look like, you've got a sort of a shopping cart here where you've put a handbag, and there is an option there to make that order carbon neutral by offsetting the carbon footprint of that product. Now, this is something that a company could pass on to the consumer, or it's something that they could seek to take on themselves as a cost of doing business as an ethical company. I think the way that we look at this is that we would like companies to be reducing their carbon footprints as much as they possibly can. And they can do that, we'll go and see, by sort of research, by analyzing their processes, their operational footprint, their supply chain distribution, etc. And that would then get their footprint as low as possible. But what they could then do is look to their customers to top up, to get them to carbon positive. So you could have a sort of a wonderful alignment of a company who says, we've done everything we can to make our company have the smallest possible carbon footprint, but there is still something. Will you, the consumer, then help us kind of go on the rest of that journey? And I think that that concept of bringing a company and its customers together to achieve a goal together is a great one. I think that's a really lovely vision, and I think increasingly we are all we look at companies and we make a decision increasingly about whether to buy something from them or not, whether to work with them or not, whether to go and work for them or not, based on what sort of a company they are, and that becomes increasingly important in those decisions. One of the sort of business to business projects that we worked on was with a company in America called Rocket Insights. They had as a goal to become to get to carbon neutral ahead of time. So we're still trying to persuade them to get to carbon positive. But they spent about 2 months measuring the carbon footprint of all of their offices. They looked at the energy that they bought. They looked at the facilities that they used. They looked at aspects of business travel, and that whole process was very quick. And the result was that they offset that residual carbon footprint with us, and they are looking to Next year, they have a goal to reduce that carbon footprint by, I think it's about 15%, and so on and so forth. So again, that's a great path for a business like that to be on. And increasingly, as I said, we are seeing people coming to us and saying, that's the sort of path that I want to be on. That's the sort of thing that I want to do. The research and analysis piece, we talked about, we used the handbag example. So this is a company called Bean London, who make handbags out of recycled pieces of leather. And so their products are already significantly more emissions friendly than than the average leather handbag on the high street by up to 88%. The sorts of tools that we're working on with Bean London and that I've been talking about, I'm starting to see popping up in lots of different places. There are apps now that can help you measure food waste. There are apps now that can help you measure your energy usage, and of course, there are a lot of very sort of smart home technology products that can switch your lights on and put your your heating up and down and really help you sort of manage that. We're seeing, as I mentioned, the sort of Unilever product labeling. We're seeing an increasing number. I'm seeing an increasing number of tools that are out on in the public space, which enable us to focus on a particular part of our life, whether it is food or clothing or energy usage, and really understand what impact that has on carbon emission, on our carbon footprint, and really work on that. I think food's a really interesting one. We're coming up for Christmas, a time of more consumption than usual. There's a horrifying statistic from the UN that suggests that if food waste was a country, that it would be the third highest emitter of emissions after China and the United States. That's global food waste. It's not just in the UK. But I think there's a service called Olio where you literally get together in a community, and if you don't need the food that you've got, you can give it to your neighbor. There's a new app called Kitch, which literally scans all of your shopping list and tells you when things are going to be out of date. You need to eat this because you might have to throw it away. I think Sinead's actually just pointed out, it's a great example, is Ecosia, a web browser where every time you make a search, they plant a tree. All of you could switch to using the Ecosia browser now. You just go onto Google and Google Ecosia. And so there are an increasing number of these tools that are coming into play, all of which are just making a small difference here and there and making it easier for us to make a difference. Finally, just sort of finishing out on the kind of the rallying cry. I've talked a lot about what we can do as individuals. I've talked about the sort of work that we're doing with companies. We as consumers have an enormous amount of power and of ability to drive change by the choices that we make about who we do business with. And do business with, I mean buy things from, or work for, or work with. And if we actively choose to say, I want to buy things from this company, not from that company, because this company is showing me that they care about this problem, again, that can have a cumulative effect. The old-fashioned phrase, voting with your feet. And I believe that the corporate sector is very aware of this, because you can see companies making much more of an effort to publish and publicize what they are doing to be more eco-friendly, to be more environmentally conscious, to be more sustainable as businesses. Don't take all of it as face value. I'm sure that you won't. It needs to be investigated. It needs to be dug into to make sure that they are not bogus claims. But this is definitely something that I see a lot in the conversations that we have with companies, but also just reading the papers, as you will have done. The other thing that I think I'm really positive about is the flow of capital out of fossil fuels is becoming really quite significant. I think the two most newsworthy examples of this are both the Oxford University and Cambridge University endowment funds, which are many billions of pounds, are divesting themselves completely of investments in fossil fuels, and are undertaking a kind of microscopic examination of their investment portfolio to make sure that it is aligned with sustainable principles that I think they're taking directly from the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And so all of those things, and that comes from people saying to them, individuals saying to them, you shouldn't be investing in this sort of business. So, if there are green pensions now, there are green mortgages, there are green renewable energy supplies. This is because companies know that this is what we consumers are looking for. And so that's why I'm very positive about the impact that we as individuals can have on what can look like what is a very, very big global problem, but it is something that we can help with. I have gone on for longer than I should have done, Camilla. Apologies. And you're on mute.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to see if anybody has any questions. Now, you can either unmute yourself to ask your question, or you can you could put your hand up if you wanted to ask a question.
So I've actually got I've got a question from in the chat window here, which I would love to address. So I could roll with that one.
Address that. And then, Luke, you haven't. So anybody wanting to ask a question is not allowed to unmute themselves at the moment.
I'm going to unmute everyone. Allow participants to unmute themselves. So everybody, I think, should now be able to unmute. Ask all to unmute. Okay, let's see what that does. Has that worked? I can sort of hear some people.
Yeah.
So I feel it might have done. Good.
Yeah.
Great. Why don't you answer the question that was in the chat?
So really, really good question. In 2018, it was estimated that total life cycle carbon footprint of the internet communications and technology sector is approximately 730 million tons of CO2, or 1.4% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. Do you feel more awareness needs to be given regarding this? Absolutely, yes. Very few people think that when they watch the iPlayer or Netflix, there is any impact from a carbon emissions perspective. Very few people. And the fact is that the amount of video, which is something I obviously know a lot about from my background, the amount of video that is being produced and distributed and consumed is staggering. There are all sorts of numbers and meaningless letters after them that I could throw at you, but yes, there are. I absolutely feel more awareness needs to be given. So some of the big cloud computing providers, or the biggest, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, have all made very strong statements about reducing emissions. Microsoft has said that it will be carbon positive, I think, in the next 10 years. Google is now running 100% of its infrastructure on renewable energy. Amazon is a bit of a way behind. There is in the UK, there's a great body called Albert, which helps program makers make television programming more sustainably. There are some really good examples of that, but I would like to see, in the same way that we were talking about product labeling for Unilever products, I would like to see product labeling for technology, particularly for cloud technology, so that people understand what that impact is.
Wow. You say 1.7%.
Excellent.
Thank you, Luke. That's brilliant.
Good. You're welcome.
Good.
Thank you. Good, really good question.
Right. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask?
I think Judy.
Yeah, I've just been browsing the internet for garments for Christmas, and I see that beginning to creep in things like environmentally friendly and all the rest of it. Are they just made up by the person who's trying to sell, or is there any kind of framework started yet for fashion items?
So sadly, I suspect that some of them are, if not made up, then embellished, at least. So the best article of clothing you can buy from a sustainability perspective is one that's already been used. And so whether that's, Depop or Vestiaire or eBay or any of those places or charity shops, those are the most sustainable. However, if you are buying from new, then a lot of companies will now will now align themselves, or are now aligning themselves with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's something to look out for. See if there's anything in there in their about us section or descriptions, product descriptions about that. It's really difficult at face value to say, well, they're saying we use a very energy efficient process to dye our jeans. Okay, well, how do I know? As a rule of thumb, the more detail they go into, actually, the more likely they are to be telling the truth. There are a lot of structures and processes that companies can use to measure the emissions of their manufacturing and production processes. And there are a lot of standards which all have sort of weird names like PAS 20, and there's an ISO, and there's it's all sort of bunches of letters and numbers. You can look out for those as well. If people have gone through a certification process or an accreditation process, most of them will say, I've done this. Because why wouldn't you? If you have earned a badge, as it were, why wouldn't you display it? So looking for some form of accreditation, some form of third-party accreditation is always a good idea. I was talking to a friend of mine who has her own clothing label, and she has recently switched out one of her suppliers to another on the grounds of that other supplier being more environmentally friendly, and sort of said this in her in her recent communications to her customers. And so that as she should have done. So you can look for sort of tangible examples like that, but I would be looking to see if they're referencing any third parties, because if they are, that's usually a good sign.
Great, thank you.
I know that B Corp is quite a good sustainability.
B Corp's a very good sustainability badge.
Measure, isn't it? Or,
yeah, it's quite an arduous. I mean, I think a problem for a lot of these companies is quite an arduous task for a small company to go through B Corp certification. But again, if again, my friend's company, she doesn't have the resources or the to be able to do that, even though I know that she would like to. But again, if a company's done something specific to address this within their their business operations, they will almost certainly say something about it, and the level of detail there, I think, is significant.
Paul, you've popped up in you wanting to ask a question. Paul Pearson?
No.
No? Okay, sorry. I have a question. Luke, you, if I offset my pet's footprint with you, where does that money go? What are you doing with it?
Yeah, no, good question. The pet always brings a smile to my face. Particularly because my co-founder John's has 2 stick insects as pets. So we work with 3 offsetting projects. One is a low smoke cook stoves project, which installs low smoke cook stoves in village communities in Darfur in Sudan. One conserves rainforest in the Carbon Mountains in Cambodia, and the other preserves a huge area of peatland in Indonesia. So they are all offshore projects. Interesting thing about offsetting, well, for me anyway, is the majority of offsetting that is done is in projects that are in in far-flung places. I think one of the trends that I'm starting to see, which I think is a great thing, is people actually wanting to find projects that they can work with in the UK. So if you're going to be funding, if you're going to be investing in a project that has a positive impact on the environment, why not do it locally? Still quite limited to what you can do in the UK. It's peatland regeneration is a great one, because our peat is in a terrible state generally. Reforestation is another great one, or afforestation, woodland creation, and then you've got investments in renewable energies. I love the 3 projects that we've got. I think they're fantastic. My favorite is the cook stoves project, because it has so many other benefits beyond just reducing emissions. The health benefits to those communities, they're basically going from cooking over an open fire indoors and breathing in the smoke to having something that actually means they can cook in a room that looks and smells and exists like we do. It's great for the women in those communities, because they spend less time out gathering wood, and they can spend more time in education. They can spend more time looking for work. They can spend more time with their children. There are some, and the project was set up in a conflict zone, which is pretty amazing. I also have a soft spot for peatland, because the area in Indonesia is home to orangutans, which I love.
Excellent. Thank you.
Does that mean you'll buy another dog?
Does that mean, I'm sorry, Mark?
Sorry, does that mean you'll buy another dog, Camilla, so you can contribute a bit more?
well, I love orangutans. Why not?
The real benefit of doing it by Zoom is you can look up a few things on the internet while you go. At the moment, I've looked at the latest IMF report on how much positive subsidy is there fossil fuels, and it's 6% of global GDP at the moment. And that's really a substantial barrier to personal contributions having a big impact, while there's so much subsidy going on. And it's not just in the developing world, it's all over the place. The European Union puts $1 billion or so towards subsidizing various forms of fossil fuel. So shouldn't we also be combining this with something about expecting governments to put their money where their mouth is?
Yes, I think we should. I would agree with all of that. But then that comes down to my kind of voting with your feet. I think there's 2 types of pressure, if you like, that we can bring to bear. And I do think, and I would say that the EU subsidies as an example are a counterpoint to my examples of the Oxford endowment and the Cambridge University endowment kind of getting out of fossil fuels. But this is where you have to be, well, I try to remain optimistic. If that flow of, if you like, private capital continues out of fossil fuels, and if we the people continue to make it clear that further subsidy of fossil fuels is not acceptable, then I think those twin forces will create change. I'm not optimistic that it's going to happen next year, certainly, but I think there are enough. Mark Carney, for instance, I don't know if you're familiar with. He set up an initiative called the Task Force to radically and rapidly scale the voluntary carbon trading market, like things like that, where you've got significant figures, on the world economic stage, like the old governor of the Bank of England, setting up initiatives like that, I think will hasten the demise of fossil fuels.
As would a carbon tax.
As would a carbon tax, yeah, which I would vote for.
Which is by far and away the easiest thing to do, because there's relatively few locations where you actually have to put it on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what direction the government goes in when it comes to carbon pricing, carbon taxation. It feels like for you, for me, for I think maybe for a few people on here, like this is almost like low hanging fruit. But and I'm not an economist, but taxation usually is a bit more difficult than that. But I think in the same way that we had in the same way that I don't know if this is a good analogy, salt and sugar labeling, there's a huge outcry about whether you should put, how much salt and sugar there was on a product. And then, we all got used to it because we knew that it was bad for us. That on the consumer side of things, I think so labeling will be a huge benefit and will actually drive changes that ultimately will lead to will lead to more attention being paid to reducing emissions.
Yes, I think the sugar tax on fizzy drinks was probably the one that showed where both the manufacturers and the consumers behaved, and it did bring sugar consumption down through that by a third.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if we could come together around something like that on carbon emissions, that would be a great analogy. Yes.
I did hear the other day that some of that, what appears to be fossil fuel subsidy, is actually fuel payment cuts for people on low incomes. So I mean, that's another easy switch, isn't it? That actually should make them switch on to green tariffs before the government supports their fuel payments. But I did hear that is skewing some of those what looks like huge investment in fossil fuel by our government, particularly is not.
Our government, to be honest, the British government doesn't do it much.
Yeah,
because most of our we have quite a high proportion of low carbon electricity.
Yeah, we do, and it's accelerated over the last 2 to 3 years. But it's interesting though that there are still, saying to somebody, why don't you switch to a renewable energy tariff? Again, there still seems to be a relatively low level of awareness of A, that you can do that, B, how easy it is, and C, that it can save you money. That last one is always such a surprise to me, which is, I think there is for many people, there is a misconception that living a more sustainable life is more expensive. It's probably got something to do with the cost of organic food. That was a sort of small joke, but equally, you ultimately you save money. I save, I think, probably 100 to 120 pounds a year by being on a green energy tariff. It's, even if you're doing it for reasons of economics, it's a no-brainer. And I think I see more advertisements on billboards, on the television, in big outdoor spaces, advising people of renewable energy tariffs and green energy tariffs and of the availability. But I would love to see government really pushing for to get everyone onto a renewable energy tariff in a time frame. The other thing, sorry, just on energy consumption that has been in the news a little bit, I mean, there's the Green Homes Grant, there's a horrifying statistic which apparently is, if we properly insulated all of the old housing, so all of the housing stock in the UK, it would reduce our national energy bill by 1/3. So, I would love, I mean, again, I think the Green Homes Grant is a great start. You can use that for insulation. That's actually that, and well, that is the primary usage for it. And then secondary, I think, is installing forms of renewable energy on a domestic level, like solar panels or ground floor. But making a real push to to cut our national energy bill by having proper insulation, again, feels like a no-brainer, particularly because it's going to be very labor intensive. And, you know, the aftermath, unfortunately of COVID, is that there is going to be a need for jobs and for job creation. And so again, that feels to me like a really good circular solution to both of those problems.
Yeah, I think that's
it's very difficult, I find, to make choices, to know which is the right thing to do when you're looking for products that are very similar in price, but one comes from abroad and the other one is UK made. What impact does the travel have on the environment? Is it worth taking that into consideration?
Absolutely it is. Yeah, absolutely it is. There's a sort of an adage that, you know, eat local, eat seasonal. And if you follow that, that will mean that you are effectively on a low carbon diet. But if you are eating, what's a good one? I mean, the apples from New Zealand.
I'd like to mention dog food, that I was buying some dog food online. Both similar price, the type of dog food that my vet had advised for the dogs. And one of them came from, I think, Germany and was made in Germany. One was here in UK. So I bought the one that was from here.
As a rule of thumb, I would always say buy local over buying something that has been, this sounds a bit jingoistic, but ultimately that product has had to be transported, you know, where it's been manufactured to the UK. And so the emissions from that part of that chain are, you know, are going to be higher. And if you're flying, you know, apples or avocados or whatever it is in from wherever, or even if you're just putting them in a, you know, even if I say if you're putting them in a ship and ferrying them over, you know, weeks and months, there's still you know, there is still going to be a footprint to that. So I think if it's possible to buy local produce, local products, that's always a good way to go. I think particularly if they're the same price. And I understand that, you know, it can often be difficult to prioritize buying something locally if it's a lot more expensive than something that's been imported. But I think if there isn't much of a price difference, I would go local every time. And I think that is, you know, again, as a rule of thumb, a good way of cutting down on the carbon emissions.
Another
so
thing
what do you do about
very interesting is the fact that people are more into accepting repairing things and valuing them for, you know, for what they are, rather than the fact of saying, oh, you repair it, no, throw it away, it's no good, it's all going to go sideways, you know. So I think that's a very good sign that people are beginning to appreciate good things and to be able to praise when somebody's put a patch on something, you know.
No, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly.
Isn't there an EU directive just about to come out about the right to repair?
I don't know. Is there? That sounds good.
Which
I think it's out already.
We will not implement.
And what is, and forgive my ignorance, what does the right of repair state?
Well, it's putting an obligation on manufacturers, and it's really using Apple phones as an example.
Yeah. So it's getting rid of inbuilt obsolescence. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I think that is a very important.
To make it easy to replace the screen if you crack it and things like that. You know?
Yeah. The smartphones, I mean, Apple phones particularly, are a really good example of where you know, the manufacturer has kind of gone off on a very I don't know how else to say it, on a really bad path. Like the idea that you need to replace this incredibly expensive item every 18 months that's composed of a bunch of materials that have to be mined in 1 or 2 or 3 places. What's interesting, and this is, I like Apple products, and so I feel a bit of a traitor for saying this, but recently Apple came out and said that in about the next, I think, 5 years, it's in their latest sustainability report, all of the components of their phones would be made from 100% recycled components, so materials, which is fantastic, which means no more sort of rare metals and sort of things that have to be mined. I did have to ask myself whether that was purely because they're good citizens, or whether all of the mines for, I can't remember the name of the precious metal now, are actually owned by China. So anyway, it's in the end result is good, so good. But you wonder what
what the motivation here?
What the motivation was, yes.
Yes, from 2021, the right to repair across Europe. So yeah. I guess we will miss that. But the restart project is something that is based in London, and is quite a strong lobbying force, I think, in the kind of right to repair movement. So let's hope to continue.
I'm going to put for those that are interested, the link to Apple's sustainability report in the chat window, and I've probably got the numbers wrong, but I thought it was a very interesting read, and you can take it at face value or not, but yeah, there we go.
Brilliant. I think we might it's now 9:15, so I think we might draw the evening to a close. We will, as I said, we have recorded this evening. We'll put a link onto the Transition Oundle website, and certainly we'll try and put those slides up on as a downloadable file on the website.
Sorry, Camilla, before we go, I think there's sorry, Kat, you've had your hand up. I apologize.
Oh, sorry, I did not see hands up.
I did not. Please, did you have a question? And thank you, Lynn, for alerting me.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I did just want to see, because basically we've used in the past the World Wildlife Fund's carbon calculator. And we've offset our carbon in the past, and we're doing a lot, or we're trying to look at how best to reduce kind of analyzing our overall footprint and where are the key areas. A couple of questions. One was, we worked out that like our emissions are way higher than like an average. So we had more like 20 tons. We do a lot of international travel, long distances. And so is there any technology, like any apps or kind of websites that you'd recommend to work out the best things that we can do to help reduce our footprints? Because that's what we kind of are coming up against, is the fact that we can calculate it, but other than, we've switched to renewable energy, we've kind of done like the main key things. And just as there, like, I'm struggling to find kind of areas that really give you good guidance on that, and how to kind of calculate more nitty gritty rather than just, this is how far I've flown.
So I would say go and have a look at Geeky Zero, which is a wonderful name. GIKI Zero. So they provide an app that enables you to do a pretty forensic analysis of an individual's carbon footprint. I don't know whether they also offer it at the corporate level. I think they might do, but definitely have a look at that. And then you can get my contact details from Camilla. I can I can follow up on that. I think we do, we've just, as I mentioned, we've just done a couple of carbon footprinting analysis for businesses, and there is some low-hanging fruit. As you said, you can switch to a renewable energy company. You can look to cut down on your air travel. But actually, I think what it has come down to is actually look at what are the individuals doing, and how are they doing it, and then sort of going, from there. So check out Geeky Zero. I'll have a look in the meantime and see if I can find out whether they do corporate work as well. But definitely they're operating at the level of detail that I think you're looking for.
Okay. No,
and I think unfortunately the only other option at the moment is to go down a consulting route where you actually get people in and they do all of that and then they come back with a set of recommendations and say, here you go. If you've done the footprint analysis yourself, there may have been some things that you've missed or that weren't immediately obvious. So that would potentially be another option.
Are there consulting companies that offer it for personal, just individual people, to kind of really look at your carbon footprint on an individual basis or family basis? Like,
I mean, I suppose we sort of do, but then we don't. We again, with a view to sort of to providing us a simple approach as possible, we would just do the average because it all averages out. So we would say, if you wanted to. Actually, I'm trying to think of what a good example is here, and that's not it. I think what you're looking for is more of a sort of somewhere between the kind of World Wildlife Fund's calculator, which can be used for individuals, and I'm guessing that you've used that as well. But then, okay, I've got my report, I can see how everything splits up, but like, okay, well, what should I be tackling and how? And actually, to be fair, we don't do that because we would just do it in the round. But I would happily do that, informally if you wanted to sort of show me what the breakdown was. We do provide sort of blogs and guidance on kind of what low-hanging fruit is.
Okay, no, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. And again, apologies for having ignored you for so long. I'm very sorry.
Okay, we were talking. It's fine.
He's usually really nice, doesn't ignore people. Geeky Zero does have a pro section to it, so that's where you can do it across a company or a group of people together. You could do it in a school and get all the pupils, kind of competing against each other. And they also actually have an app that is just called Geeky, I think, which is you can compare products. You can look at a product and see, they've rated loads of different just food products that are in the supermarket, but it's not just on carbon. It'll be things like whether it contains palm oil, where it's made, whether the company's got good environmental sort of reporting mechanism. So it rates. It's sometimes quite useful to take around a supermarket with you if you're slightly boring, maybe, or want the detail.
I've got a couple more questions that have come across in the chat window. Do we have time to address these?
Yeah.
Good. So a really interesting question, which was, if we had a system of putting the carbon cost on an item, how would we know that it was true or correct? That's a really tricky one. There would be the dreaded small print that would sit with the labeling that said this carbon cost has been arrived at using the following certification or accreditation, or you have the Food Standards Agency, you would have the equivalent. So there would be some form of badge or mark somewhere that says this has been independently verified by a third party. Whether you recognize that third party or not and felt reassured and confident is a very different matter, which is why ultimately I think it would need to be something that was done in conjunction with government. I think otherwise you get into is that somebody marking their own homework? And that's obviously something that we are right to be suspicious about. So third party, independent third party verification or accreditation, preferably government backed. This is one, observations on level of emissions in production of electric cars versus reduction in carbon emissions from the banning of new petrol or diesel cars. My father has worked in the automotive industry for many years and has bent my ear at length about electric cars and battery lives and the emissions from those batteries and how to get rid of them and so forth. And so I'm I am not as wholehearted an advocate as electric cars as I might be from listening to him. I don't have any observations that I think will be useful, but I am not convinced that electric cars are a kind of panacea, that they are that people are hoping. I think they're on balance, they're a good thing, but equally, I don't think that we are fully aware of all of the, of what the impact of shifting wholesale to electric cars will be, when we get sort of to, year 30 of having had them. That said, in the round, I'm in favor, because anything that is using less, less things that are created from fossil fuels, I think is on balance good, and it's a good way of keeping the message clear. But I'm slightly, as you can probably tell, I'm slightly hesitant to give it a sort of wholehearted, this is brilliant and we should all move over as quickly as possible and there won't be any problems. And what do I think of labeling technical devices with the amount of carbon emissions? Yes, I think that's a great idea. In the same way that I'd like to see food labeled, and Netflix and the iPlayer and YouTube labeled. I think some form of labeling on everything. I would actually say I would like to see everything labeled with with its carbon cost, which probably seems a little bit over the top, but I genuinely believe that if you did that, there wouldn't be an awareness problem anymore. So I think that, sorry, climate change is, this is really not finally. So do I think COVID-19 will drive change to fossil fuel industries and politicians? I hope so. I feel like that could be the silver lining, the whole grow back greener phrase that we hear trotted out a lot. I would love to think that that is how we will recover nationally from COVID, from an economic point of view, anyway. So the optimist in me says yes. I think that will drive change.